So I think myself, like most photographers out there, struggle what camera to bring for really any kind of trip, whether it's just a quick outing for the evening or a weekend trip or a much longer kind of dedicated photography trip. There's many different options for cameras nowadays, and it's hard to pick a camera that actually works for you. For the last several years, I've tried to find a small, compact camera that fits in my pocket so I can document my personal life and just bring along on excursions and trips and weekend outings, just to be able to document my own personal life. I think having a camera on hand, specifically as a photographer, is not only going to enhance your creativity, but it's also going to allow you to take those intimate, candid moments of your life and be able to look back on those. I know we live in a day and age where cell phones and iPhones are pretty incredible at what they do, photographically speaking, but for me, I'd rather have a dedicated camera for this. There's something about phone photos for me, they don't hit the same as a photo on an actual camera does. And maybe we'll get there someday, but currently standing, I'd much rather have a dedicated camera to be able to capture those memories. Now, by no means am I saying that the iPhone isn't a capable camera. I just really enjoy having a dedicated camera to be able to bring with me along. Now, on this quest for the perfect pocket camera, I've tried, obviously, film point and shoots. I've also tried larger bodies like the Fuji X-T5, all of which have been great, but they haven't really ticked all of the boxes necessarily that I'm looking for in a camera, which leads me to my newest purchase, the Ricoh GR3X. Now, the Ricoh ticked a lot of boxes for me, especially with what I was looking for. It has a 40mm lens equivalent, which is perfect for candid portraits, but it's also great for travel and lifestyle and street photography, all of which I really enjoy shooting on my travels. Ricoh also sells a 28mm option, which I just felt was too wide for my own personal taste. I don't shoot that wide typically, so I felt like the 40 was a pretty perfect solution and a great focal length for me to be able to mess around with. Two of my favorite cameras ever, the Contax T3 and T2, are both in this 40mm range. The T2 has a 38mm and the T3 has a 35mm lens. Obviously 40 is slightly more punched in. I do wish, if I could be really picky, that this lens was closer to 35mm, but I do think the 40 adds a really nice depth, especially when you're taking portraits. So since acquiring this camera, I've pretty much brought it everywhere with me. And that goes for actual week-long trips, weekend excursions, even just nights out with friends. This camera fits in my pocket very easily, and I find it extremely easy to just turn on and shoot with, which at the end of the day is exactly what I'm looking for. I don't want this camera to have 100 different features. I want it to be simple. I want it to be straightforward to use. And at the end of the day, I want to be able to get a great image out of the camera. What's funny is it actually takes up less space than my iPhone 15 Pro Max, which is a massive phone. This camera is actually smaller than that. So it's great. It fits in my pocket, no problem at all. And I really don't even notice that it's there, which again is another really big selling point of this camera is the size. It's so tiny to the point where you don't even have to ask yourself if it's worth it to bring it. You're just going to bring it along. As I mentioned, I think there's just something special about holding something sort of tangible in your hands rather than just a phone. Bringing this camera along has really kind of just made me enjoy capturing my life that much more. It's so small, so compact, and I find that the image is just gorgeous out of this thing. So I recently took the Ricoh on a trip to Copenhagen with some friends. We were out there for just about 4 days, and I brought the Ricoh along pretty much every single day. I knew I didn't want to bring something large like my GFX or Mamiya 7. Those are just big cameras, and you have to lug them over your shoulder. Also, when you bring them out to take a photo, it's just kind of distracting. Another thing that's really helpful about the size of the Ricoh is you can take a photo and get right back to the moment, and you're not really disrupting too much. Especially if you're taking a photo of somebody and they're not used to having their photo taken, bringing out a big camera like the GFX is quite daunting. So having a smaller setup like the Ricoh, it's perfect for those kind of intimate moments. I shot a wide variety of stuff in Copenhagen, really just kind of what we were up to. A lot of street, some portraits, some cool kind of city scenes. We did a lot of swimming and eating, so I took a lot of photos of that as well. And I felt like the camera really captured exactly how it felt to be there, which was really cool to see. I shot over 800 photos on this trip and was able to edit them really quickly and be able to send them off to friends. I was really impressed when I was importing these files into Lightroom how easy they were to edit. I shot all raw for the most part. I could see myself maybe shooting JPEG at some point, but I really do love the flexibility of being able to go back and edit a raw photo. Ricoh obviously knows what they're doing when it comes to cameras. You know, they used to be Pentax, and obviously with the long line of Pentax cameras, some of which I've used, they're very heralded for their image quality, and Ricoh is no different. I'm really impressed with this little guy. Something that's important to me is that the files don't look too digital, and the 40mm lens on here ticks all the boxes. You know, it has a really nice character, a nice sharpness, but it doesn't look overly sharpened. I can obviously reduce some of that in Lightroom as well with the clarity and sharpness slider. But for the most part, I felt like I didn't really need to do that too much, which is great. You know, for someone like me who typically does bring out a larger camera on most outings, I really wanted to be able to simplify all that and just bring one small camera with me and see how that went. You know, I myself definitely struggle with this, thinking that I always need the next brand new camera in my camera bag, and having this camera and just this camera alone on this trip was really refreshing for me. Getting home from that trip in Copenhagen and also being able to get home and take this camera on a few different excursions here around LA and California. I'm very excited to see what I can shoot with this camera in the coming months. When it comes to my actual gripes with this camera, I only have a few. The main one is definitely the lack of any sort of viewfinder, optically or electronically. I think as a professional photographer, I'm just so used to bringing that camera up to my eye and looking through it that it was definitely a challenge at first to get used to the Ricoh and how there's no sort of viewfinder whatsoever. I brought the camera up to my eyes and smacked my face multiple times while getting used to shooting with this camera. I think it's just instinctual, you know, when you're used to shooting with cameras that do have some sort of viewfinder, whether it be optical or electronic. You're used to bringing that camera up to your eye. It's part of the photographic process. It's part of your just muscle memory. So training myself to not do that has been a bit of a challenge. I'm definitely interested in picking up their optional optical viewfinder, which is $250. So it's pretty expensive. I do think for the price, it's a bit of a stretch, but I do want to see what it's like and if it helps the process at all, because that really is my main gripe right now, is that I can't shoot through any sort of viewfinder with the camera. I also feel like the build quality is a little cheap on this camera. It's not very robust. I've already scratched it several different times and I really haven't been pushing it around too much. I guess that's kind of what it's made for though, is, you know, it's not going to be a perfectly polished camera if you're going to be using it every day. I just think that it could have been made maybe with slightly better materials, but overall that's not really too big of a gripe. My main one is definitely with the viewfinder and the lack of being able to use any sort of viewfinder with this camera. Very happy that this camera charges with USB-C. I think that, you know, really everything is shifting towards that right now, which is great. For the most part, everything that I own now charges with USB-C, so it's really helpful when traveling. You don't have to bring 15 different cables anymore for all your little gadgets. Having one cable that charges everything is super helpful. I find that a portable battery is more than enough to be able to charge this camera throughout the day. I'll take a few photos and be able to just throw it in my bag and plug it into the portable battery as I'm walking around. And then the battery life has more than enough for the rest of the day. You can obviously bring a couple extra physical batteries with you as well, which I usually do. But between both of those, I'm plenty covered when it comes to the actual images I'm trying to take. When it comes to the actual shooting modes, I typically shoot on aperture priority with this camera. The reason I do this is I feel like it's the most simple way to be able to get the images that I want, but still have a little bit of control. Aperture to me, I think affects the image the most compared to shutter speed or ISO. So I focus on that and adjust accordingly with the exposure compensation dial. This is how I shoot on a lot of my cameras, to be honest. And I find that it works really well. I limit the ISO to 6400 and I also limit the shutter speed to 1/125th to make sure that the images are sharp and clean. If I'm in a dimly lit environment or if I want that boost of a flash, I'll typically throw on the Fuji EFX20 flash that I use with my X-T5. This flash is nice and small as well, so it fits great on the camera. It looks a little dorky because it's almost the size of the camera, but compared to other strobes and larger flashes, I think this works really great. If anyone has a recommendation for a smaller flash for this camera, definitely open to hearing some recommendations for that as well. So typically I'll place this camera in my Snow Peak shoulder bag, which I showed you guys in my previous video when I was chatting about all the gear that I was bringing to Iceland. In this bag I'll also include my wallet, my keys, my portable battery charger, and usually a couple extra batteries for the camera as well. Toss my phone in there and I'm pretty much set to go for the entire day in any sort of city or travel scenario. I usually bring this in tandem with my camera bag and it works really well to have both of these. The Ricoh is kind of separate from the rest of my camera gear in the sense that I pretty much am always bringing it with me. So having that ability to just put it in my shoulder bag, it's perfect. You know, overall, I think every photographer should have some sort of small camera in their pocket, whether it's a film point and shoot like the Contax T3, which I also still love, or it's a more simple digital camera setup like the Ricoh GR3X. Whatever it may be, It can be something simple, it can be something cheap, but I think having that small camera on you at all times and being able to document those really intimate, memorable moments in your life, I really don't think you'll regret it. Now, as I had mentioned, I've only had this camera for about a month, maybe a little bit longer. So I'm looking forward to making some more videos with this camera, exploring what it can do and also sharing the results. But for now, I just wanted to make a video and share some initial thoughts with you. So far, I'm really loving this camera. If you guys want to take a look at some of the images I've shot, I'll leave a link down to my website, which you guys can take a look. Now, before this video wraps up, I did want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, which is Squarespace, for sponsoring today's episode. Now, as you guys know by now, Squarespace is a very long-time supporter of this YouTube channel and my creative endeavors. I truly cannot thank them enough for their continued support over the years and allowing me to make the videos that I want to make here on the channel. Simply put, Squarespace is just the easiest way to make any sort of creative website, whether you're looking to display your work, make an e-commerce page to sell digital or physical products, create gallery pages for your different projects, or even book appointments. Squarespace makes this extremely easy to lay out and design your own website from scratch. If you guys want to check out Squarespace for yourself, there'll be a link down in the description to receive 10% off your first website or domain purchase. Thanks so much to Squarespace as always for sponsoring this video, and thanks to you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next one.